Hi, I'm standing in today for Reverend Donnie G. Macdonald, our moderator, who is taking a well-deserved break. He has been so faithful and hugely encouraging and pastoral over this last year, and deserves a rest, and it's time to bring on the subs. It has been clearly a tough year for us. I hope we're coming towards the end of this period of restrictions, and maybe this latter period has been harder than the earlier days in many ways. But I want to be encouraging today and remind ourselves how well we've been able to adapt as a church to harness technology and to learn to do things in a way that enables the gospel still to be proclaimed and for a degree of fellowship still to be had, even though it's been online. And I think at the same time we've got used to a whole different vocabulary around church. When I was growing up, YouTube would be an insult, that you would, a term of derision towards someone. But now churches are encouraged to subscribe to YouTube and to have their own YouTube channel, which is great. And also we invite people to church differently. We are now inviting them via Zoom, and Zoom meetings have become a temporary norm for us. And sometimes that's been great, sometimes it's been a bit of a nightmare. But I think that Zoom meetings definitely, there's parallels between Zoom meetings and church meetings. I think if you find yourself in the waiting room on a Zoom call, you're probably the type of person that would have arrived really early for church and good time. If you sit with your camera off, you might be the kind of person that likes to sit in the back row or the back seat of the back pew of church. If you are on mute, you're clearly not the minister. If someone else mutes you, it's probably the minister that's done it. And if you press the leave meeting now button, it's because you've had enough of the minister rambling on for far too long. So maybe there are some advantages of using Zoom as opposed to the real thing. But lots of people have asked me over this year, and I'm sure they've asked you as well, what have you learned? What will we do differently as a result of this year, and how can we change? And I'm never very sure how to answer that question, but there are definitely some things that are worth considering and thinking about. I think one thing to be encouraged by is that when we adapt to our circumstances, it doesn't mean that we are selling our souls. Certainly we require God's wisdom to remain both faithful and relevant, but it can be done, and it's important that we do so. As our spiritual roots are firmly grounded in Christ, the living water, then we learn through the Spirit to understand and know what is important, what must remain, what is secondary, and what can be left behind. I think also we've been encouraged to be reminded that the gospel itself is new in our lives every day. We're called to change and to adapt every day to the gospel in our hearts and in our lives. The Bible calls that sanctification. Not changing as a Christian is a mark of death, not life. And during this year, I think our response as Christians, as individuals, to the suffering and the challenges of the year will or will not, in many ways, bear powerful testimony to Christ at work in our hearts. We hope that as we've displayed faith and trust and hope in Christ, that it will provoke questions in the people around us, our colleagues, our friends, our neighbours, our family who don't know Jesus, that will provoke them to ask about the hope that we have, and that as we are given that opportunity, we will tell them about the gospel. And I think that's important today because there's precious little hope around. And it's my prayer that God will use the answers we give to raise up a whole new family of believers in this lost generation. And I also hope that as a result of this pandemic, that when we do come together in community and in worship, which will happen soon, I've no doubt about that whatsoever, I pray that we will value it maybe 1,000 times more than we did previously. That we'll never take God and worship and fellowship and each other for granted as Christians. That we'll never consider coming to church a drudgery, or that it will be low in our priorities again, that our fellow Christians will not be people that we ignore in our lives, but we will love worship, and that we'll be hungry to be equipped through it to live in gospel community, to be disciples and to make disciples, and to remember where our citizenship lies in Christ. I think God has been very gracious and faithful over this last year for us and to us. And I got great comfort early on in the pandemic when I was reading the Bible in the Old Testament and Isaiah. And God, I felt, comforted me really greatly with words from Isaiah 41 verse 13, which I've kept and I've remembered and prayed through and been encouraged by many, many times since. For I am the Lord your God, he says, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. And that is the testimony we have of God through this, and may it increasingly be our testimony in the days and months to come. Thanks.